It might have been one of the strangest things to happen to Lynn, Peabody, and Salem, and nothing like it has happened since. It was a fleeting incident that we talked about in a did you see that kind of way, and not really talked about it any further. It was a singular occurrence that rippled through the Essex County civilians like a benign earthquake. Most people were too distracted to see it going by, and only caught the tail end of it as it scattered down the street. For the human race is never ready for these sudden moments so sublime that they border on horror. In April 2022, Lila Concord happened upon a book of Corbin Chatterton's poems in a moment of pure serendipity. Lila herself was 31 and played the organ at St. Mary's Church in Lynn, Massachusetts. She found the volume of Chatterton's poems in the South Branch of the Peabody Library on a particularly warm day. It was sitting dusty and neglected behind a row of 19th century novels that included Wuthering Heights, Emma, and Far from the Maddening the Crowd. Here, this bygone poet hid behind the statue of the English greats, an American child playing in their shadows. She reached for the volume the way you'd reach to scoop up an injured mourning dove, something which had cooed outside her window that morning. "Oh, I forgot we had that," the elderly librarian cooed, with her voice creaking with apology. Her eyes practically flew through her spectacles and onto the volume with both remembrance and inquiry. "Corbin Chatterton. He was born in Salem, you know, buried somewhere in Piney Grove Cemetery in Lynn." "It was kind of hidden behind the English classics back there," Lila explained. The library took on the brevity of a bazaar. The librarian walked into her own memory to shill out a bargain. "Yes, he was an early romantic. He couldn't quite seem to launch himself into literary stardom like some of the others, though." Lila felt the injured mourning dove twitch its wings within her chest. "Oh, what happened?" "I think it was 1825 that he got very sick and died. It might have been consumption. His poetry lived on through some small presses. I believe this volume is an original from 1823. "May I check it out?" "Honey, I don't think anybody's ever checked out this book. I myself even forgot it was here. I'll let you have it as long as you want." "Thank you. You said he was buried in Pine Grove Cemetery?" "I believe so. Well, you see, originally he was buried in a potter's field somewhere in Danvers, but when Pine Grove was established in 1849, his surviving brother motioned for him to be moved there. His brother worked and worked to afford a proper tombstone for him. I don't remember where in Pine Grove he is exactly, but he's somewhere in there." "Alone?" Lila breathed. "Naturally," the librarian said, and took the book, opened it, and stamped the receipt before sticking it in the first page. It had no prior stamps. "What did the young man write about?" "I haven't flipped through that volume in a while. At first he was obsessed with the sea. Then, I think, he began going batty and started writing about love." "One has to be batty to write about love?" Lila snickered to herself. "Batty as Corbin Chatterton." "Ma'am, how old was he?" "I think early to mid-20s. He was an apprentice of some sort before poetry whisked him away. He had no higher education. He was just one of those late symptoms of Shakespeare." Lila, having no response, turned the volume over in her hand, a movement that made her beaded bracelet jingle. "I'll have to take a look at it today. Thank you." "You have a wonderful day, young lady, and enjoy the beautiful weather." She gave a charitable smile while stepping backwards towards the door. "Oh, I will. You too. Bye," and carried Corbin Chatterton back out into the world, into spring weather that the poets and romantics would have gone hysterical for. She took the volume over to Pine Grove Cemetery, the grounds of which were enclosed by a tall cobblestone wall caked in moss. It was quieter than the library. All the tombstones, Madonna statues, and crosses ranged from the kind of stone Medusa's eyes introduced to the polished copper pennies they would never be again. She carried the volume over to the dip in the land where there was a turtle pond frequented by ducks. She sat down on the lime-green lawn where its rainwater smell welcomed her, and all the turtles sunned themselves on the rocks of the pond. The turtles were such content aliens with black heads that had yellow stripes and eyes concentrated in an outer space serenity. Their content was contagious, and it put Lila in the proper mood to read poetry that was 199 years old. She read some verses aloud to herself as if to make sense of them. They made eternity for only two. We mustn't count the wedding's thunderbolt. They made eternity for me and you. She flipped to the next page. She was careful with her voice, knowing literature and poetry needed a diligent vessel, and that even reading poetry alone was still a responsibility. Her voice was meticulous as she read a new poem to the turtles. Today I set a cooing pigeon free, into the radiant tomorrow flew, a dove to find my lover yet to be. I watched it near the sunset's golden hoop, and joined its luster as the portal closed, to find a woman that I've yet to know. Lila read, and she imagined a young man in a white blouse with loose cuffs, donating a mourning dove to the sky in a celebratory manner. In her mind's eye, she saw the dove, shrinking and shrinking, as it flew away until it vanished, and she thought about the mourning dove that had been cooing outside her window that morning. It ached her, because she could only imagine the majority of this pigeon frere battling the identity crisis of being a silhouette, faint stripes of sunlight to break up the shadows of its figure. She could picture him releasing the bird, and she could picture him being 80% silhouette, even though the poem stated absolutely nothing about it. That was a short one, she said to the turtles. Then she started another poem. I hear the organ, but it's far away. I hear her rosary jingling. Oh, what a gallows is a maiden's wrist, a future knuckle that I've never kissed. The organ music jumps between our times. I hear the thunderclout distort its hymns, which would have played the day our wedding day, a sound no church in Salem claimed to make. I asked the organist to play again and imitate what I heard to him. Oh, but the hymn I heard must not exist, for what he played I did not recognize. But still, sometimes the humming leaves my lips, and though alone, in love I am today. The poem finished, and something came over her. It does exist, she shouted at the open volume. That line, oh, but the hymn I heard must not exist, caused this aggravation in her. She had shouted with the air of being in the thrall of a romantic quarrel, a couple arguing in a kitchen, but she was just in front of the turtle pond in the Pine Grove Cemetery. She had sounded so desperate to get some phantom husband to realize something, but all she did was make the sunning turtles retreat their heads into their shells. The beads of her jangling bracelet when she turned the page. The beads of her bracelet jingled when she turned the page. Beyond the universe's growing pains, the nebulas who take so long to stretch, I think my love is in the future days, and woe that just my ghost will know her breath. She mumbled, the poetry having administered some sedative to her narrative voice. Corbin, she whined sympathetically under her breath. She brushed her finger over the tan pages, as if to disrupt the seeds out of the poetry. But all the words had already been planted and sprouted. She looked up from her volume at the turtles. They were just starting to poke their heads back out with the languid speed of sunrises. She felt as slow as them. She returned her attention to the poetry and read quietly, no longer reading aloud so as to keep her from shouting again. She ended up remaining quiet for so long that the turtles might have started believing that she was one of the Madonna statues, if a Madonna statue got up, sat down, and took off her shawl. The volume was 121 pages. Some pages had 2 poems on them. Some just had 1. And some poems rambled on for 2 or 3 pages. They weren't all about the strange long-distance relationship the poet had, but some were mundane and about nature, typical poet things. Some were about mortality, were celebrations of Jesus' sacrifice, but most of those 121 pages harbored poems of this strange long-distance romance. And when Lila had time to feel what she had read, the analytical part of her mind started awake, which only deepened her curiosity. "Oh, honey, I said you could keep that book for longer," the librarian cheered when Lila entered the south branch of the Peabody Library the next day. The librarian's face was red and puffy with joy, while Lila, everything about Lila was alive. Beads on her wrist jangled as she stomped, not walked, and her black tresses bounced. She had gotten a little pink from sitting in the sun yesterday, and now there were 121 pages of poetry in her eyes. She looked angry to have not known about the volume sooner. "Have you ever shouted at a book?" Lila asked, to which the librarian shrugged. "Not in here, not since I was a girl, but yes, plenty of times." "When the narrator was wrong about something?" "Honey, I find sometimes the narrator is often right, but we just don't know how to accept it. That's how you know it's a great story. Why, did Corbin Chatterton ruffle your feathers?" Lila didn't answer. Instead, she looked down at the volume and thought of the line that made her shout, "Oh, but the hymn I heard must not exist." She didn't shout now, but felt her unbridled rebuttal echo within her. "I guess he moved me," she admitted. The librarian's smile was enough to make the April sky outside even bluer. "I just needed someone to talk with about this collection," Lila said, in another admission. "Well, I'm certainly not busy now," the librarian said. "Looks like it's just us in here, honey. Why don't we dissect some of it together?" "I'd like that," Lila said, and though separated by age, the two shared a smile. The librarian waddled out from behind the desk, and the two sat at a table with the rustic rainbows of book spines behind them. They went through the poems that affected Lila the most, but the whole time someone was knocking on the door of a cottage in her mind. She did her best to ignore it because she wanted to be polite, and nod while the librarian read a poem, gave her 2 cents on it, and then read and analyzed another. "I think this one summarizes Corbin's feelings of how the realization of expectation is constant. See here, a string in time, my finger interrupts. I feel, not hear, but feel, the summer air I pluck. Geez, that's beautiful, isn't it?" "It is," Lila agreed, but where did that pride in her voice come from? "Play on, the great nothing I wrote myself. Today's tranquility will be enough," the librarian read. "The pointer finger plucks, the middle plucks, and then sometimes it twitches in my thumb. Ah, see? I love that." The librarian held up her hands and wiggled her fingers, drawing a pleasant chuckle from Lila. "Is this the only work of his you have? I can call the main branch and see if there are any of his other collections, but yes, as far as I know, you are in possession of the only Corbin Chatterton work we have in the South Branch. Very interesting, Lila said, thoughtfully, her eyes consulting the closed volume on the table. Did you have any idea of where he's buried? No, honey. I'm sorry to say I don't. As I said before, he's in Pine Grove, but I'm not sure which section or lot he's in. I think I'm going to go look for him. The librarian sounded very sorry that she had to laugh. Honey, there's almost 100,000 people buried there. That place is over 80 acres. And how many poets are buried there? This made the librarian think. She spoke for a moment and considered. I will say, you can veer from the military section, as I do know he didn't serve. It'll most likely be an old tombstone. Not sure how legible the name and the date will be, or if there will even be a name on it. Are you sure you want to do this, honey? I feel like I have to know after reading him, Lila said, but then she snickered, and the snicker seemed to be hastily trying to fasten a mask over her face. She dipped her head and looked back down at the closed volume. Where are you, Corbin? Lila asked herself that afternoon while she was walking through Pine Grove with a pen and a red notebook in hand, which she was planning to write a composition in. But she didn't want to start writing it until she found the poet's grave. Maybe creativity was equaled by death, and she wouldn't be able to find him. The only good thing was that it was a beautiful spring day, and the smell of freshly cut cemetery lawn dispelled the grass's earthy breath. She applied sunblock on her shoulders so that the smell was there, but the cold smell of the sunblock had gotten shy in the presence of the smell of grass. She walked and looked. She passed down the rows of tombstones, walked the hills, and ignored the mopey-headed trees that tried tempting her with their shade. The sheer amount of tombstones quieted her, and the more she walked, the more she began to feel that this one cemetery seemed bigger than Massachusetts itself. It also distorted her sense of time after seeing the collection of dates, all embedded in stone like 1,000 different Chinese fortunes. But they all ended up saying the same thing, which was, this person was born, and then they died, and this person was born, and then they died. The numerical possibilities of her own species almost put her in a trance, would have made her forget what she was looking for, but just as she had found the volume by chance, that's how she found his grave. It was uphill, standing short with castle-like posture. Corbin Chatterton, 1801 to 1825, read the tombstone. The letters were only visible because they had been carved, and the wrinkles on the tombstone had not caught up with the masonry yet. Atop the hill was a large oak with branches that sprawled out to form an umbrella over the daycare of tombstones. Corbin's tombstone was 80% shadows, broken up by 20% sunlight that managed to cut through the leaves. It was comforting to know that his tombstone had a ballet of sunlight and shadows to play on it all this time. Lila took a breath and sat down beside Corbin's tombstone, opening up her notebook and beginning to write, humming different notes and progressions to herself quietly so as not to disturb the dead. She wrote many movements and variations of the same movement, humming to herself and making corrections along the way, sometimes even starting all over again. What she was doing was composing more than a poem. Poetry is for the conscious, music is for the subconscious, thus explaining the almost torpid state she entered into, while inspiration whisked her away, her pen the whip that kept the steed in flight. That's what Corbin would say. She practiced on the keyboard in her room that night, making corrections and changes to her sonata along the way. Halfway through the composition, she decided on titling it as Corbin's Sonata. Its melodic and somber tones were hindered by the prissy range of her keyboard, but she knew it would sound all the better on the organ in St. Mary's. Still, even when she played it on the keyboard at 3 a.m, she couldn't help but remember how she had imagined the silhouette of the man, striped in sunset orange, that almost revealed his identity, releasing a mourning dove up into the sky. Corbin might have described the sonata as having come from a sunset. It sounded like a triumphant, yet subtle, happy ending to a life cut short. "Father Calabash, do you mind if I try something out on the organ today?" she asked the next day, while standing in the belly of St. Mary's. Father Calabash was in his black cassock with the white necktie, his eyes piercing, his skin pale, his voice of some Central European and slightly vampiric origin. Father Calabash drew his pale aurora borealis eyes up to the indoor balcony of the church, where the organ was. Its brass pipes and their many frowns were always quite the thing to see, and the machine always had monstrous promise to it. "Why, sure, I don't see why not, Miss Concord. Is it practice you seek?" said the priest with the Dunkin' coffee on his breath. She hesitated, almost dropping her red notebook. "I wanted to try writing something." Oh! Well, I was about to go out and trim some of the bushes in the parking lot, but if you want someone to give it a listen, I'm good, Father," she said warmly. "I don't want to keep you. I will most likely be able to hear it out there anyway," he said, and patted her shoulder before bundling out of the church, ready to grass stain his black pants. Lila turned behind the confession booth and took a flight of stairs that were in a cramped chute. The church's anatomy was that of wood, and not of brilliant marble and granite that are the colors of far-off temples. She proceeded to the organ like it was any other morning in Mass, and sat down. Opening up her notebook before her, there was more opportunity in an organ than any piano or keyboard, and the title she had written above the sonata seemed so promising aboard the steampunk-style instrument. Corbin's Sonata. That moment, when her hands hovered down towards the keys, was such a detrimental silence. It was like sitting in the theater and truly not being able to determine the ending of the movie. For one reason or another, her fingers hovered there for a moment. She might have imagined the man who was almost silhouette-elating underneath an orange watercolor sky. Maybe sunsets were redder back when the tragedy of Salem was fresher in the sky. However, the sky was bright blue that day in Lynn. Her fingers pressed down on the corresponding keys, and immediately the pipes came to life. It was like a resurrection for the wrongly dead. The swarm was a swarm that seemed to have started nowhere. It was in a hurry through Essex County, tens of thousands of mournful doves, all in a violent commute, not just above the streets, but through them. A lady who had been walking her little dog ducked and laid on her stomach when the swarm passed. All their wings were so fast and small that it was amazing that wings as thin as playing cards could let such plump doves accelerate the way they did. Cars lurched to respective stops in that intersection that the witch house in Salem is. The swarm was such a brief reflection on their windshields. From here, the swarm ascended, but seemed indifferent to flying too high. No, these birds' business was not in the sky. The swarm slithered and winded through residential neighborhoods, some where nobody saw them, and some where people did. They curved up and over buildings when they had to, but always came curving back down, slinking in roller coaster finesse to wherever they were going. The librarian in the South Branch Peabody Library was too involved in the book she was reading to see the blur traffic past the window, but its sound alerted her, and she looked up from her book. So did a couple of other patrons, but too late. Horns honked. A child reached out of his stroller and giggled with the 2 bubbling teeth it had. Dogs yipped, not out of malice, but out of an absurd understanding with nature. The falcons that hid in the trees stayed themselves from chasing the swarm. Seagulls in many pothole-infested parking lots remained grounded. Father Calabasas was intrigued with the sound that was coming from his church while he stooped over to weed a strip of mulch from which some hedges grew. It enhanced his gardening duties. The music sounded as misunderstood as toccata and fugue, triumphant as 99 Red Balloons, and as tickling as Vivaldi. And Lila's fingers tickled the keys as if she had been playing it all this time. Perhaps the song was always in her. That's why she played it so well. She just had to write it down for it to exist. Exist? It did exist. Her pleading shouts at the turtle pond had been worthwhile. The more the sound came out of the church with the attitude of a newly wedded couple, and the more Father Calabas progressed down the rows of hedges, the more he wished that the piece was something that he could play in his car. He wished he had it to listen to on his way to Dunk's, on his way to church, on his way to the house of the elderly, when supplying communion. Something cut the air. A shadow entered down the street that St. Mary's was on, and Father Calabasas turned to see the swarm of mourning doves shooting towards the church. Being not afraid, he stood still and watched the swarm fill the space between houses, the sounds of all those wings unfolding and folding the air. The swarm was as long as an unwound fingerprint, and it took a while for the entire swarm to amalgamate around St. Mary's. It created an ever-turning vortex around it, flying, flying, flying in a circle. When the swarm was finished arriving, Father Calabasas stepped back and craned his neck, watching the tornado of mourning doves churn. They all flew so fast, but so eloquently, without crashing into one another, that it seemed they had the grace of fighter jets. Oh, but this was a peaceful thing. The priest watched with his jaw open until Corbin's sonata ended in the sorrowful chuckle of some apologetic but happy notes, and the swarm started uncoiling itself from the church. This took some time as well, given the length of the swarm, but eventually the church was rid of it, and the swarm ascended until it became faint as smoke, growing smaller and smaller until Father Calabasas saw nothing but a blue April sky. But how strange it was to see one mourning dove falling out of the air, its wings working rapidly to cool its re-entry. It landed on a telephone wire and looked down at the priest. It looked at him and cooed like a curious cat. "Oh, your wings must be tired, little friend," the priest said, despite the distance between him and the telephone wire. And just like that, it ended. Lila's fingers retreating from the keys. The only sound in the church was the faint jingle of the beads on her wrist. Had she seen the swarm outside the stained glass window? I'm not sure. We have to leave her now, but I think she sensed us. Part of her must have heard our wings berating the air and sending feathery winds against the church. I saw a swarm of mourning doves crusade in unison into the candle cloud. Their light wings have such a sky to break, their little wings against their bellies pound. A stanza by Corbin Chatterton, 1823. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's show. If you think you might like a little more spooky in your life, then please feel free to click on one of the videos we have up here. Maybe look at one of the playlists if you're trying to get caught up. I know, there's so many videos on the channel. There's so many series that are going at the same time. Sometimes you just need a little refresher course, and I gotta say, I always enjoy the views. If you're not subscribed, feel free to hit that subscribe button. Maybe hit the bell so you don't miss anything. We upload a lot on this channel, so you won't want to miss a single story as they come out. If you'd like to support the channel, you can click on the Amazon link down there. There's quite a few books in my Amazon account. You can have a look, and if you'd like a signed copy, get up with me through email, and I'll be happy to work something out with you. Also, there's links to my Patreon, and you can become a member on the channel if you'd like your spooky a little bit early. Patrons and members on the $5 tier get their videos 12 hours early. That's in the morning as opposed to in the evening. Patrons at the $10 level also get a signed copy of my book anytime I write one. Speaking of my patrons, you should see them appearing right now. Just wanted to take a minute to say how much I appreciate all of you. Patrons, subscribers, however you give to the channel. I really appreciate everything you do, and it truly touches me that you have chosen to support the channel in this way. Well, that's enough for now. Till next time, Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.